many as 67% go to re-offend again in the first 2 years. There's something drastically wrong with the whole criminal justice, and that has to be looked at. How do we look at that? We look at partnership working between the various agencies. We mentioned victim support, but there are wonderful voluntary organizations as well who are doing an invaluable support to various agencies. The issue around how would we tackle the budget itself. The vast majority has been used up in relation to wages and pension, as you quite rightly said so. We are expecting a further 20% reduction in the budget that we have. For the next 2 financial years, the budget deficit will be filled with the reserves that we have, which in itself can be quite challenging. God forbid, if a situation ever arose where we would need to rely on the reserves, that would have disappeared. After the next 2 financial years, we'll have a massive deficit. How will we tackle that deficit? There are the obvious, which is partnership working with the neighbouring police. We have Leicestershire, Derbyshire. In fact, I sit on the East Midlands Community Contact Unit of the 5 police regions that look at issues through channel and the issues of providing support to people that are vulnerable, and the issue you picked up in relation to mental health, etc., which is one of the largest problems that we have in relation to crime, both locally but even crime of a serious nature. And there is a fundamental refusal in some quarters, in my work, training with hospitals, training with education establishment, who move away and say that this is a security issue. So we need to build those bridges to say we all need to buy into it. So how do we work in relation to that? A greater cooperation with existing mental health institutions, education sector, etc. Cross-party. After all of this has gone through and we have not managed to fill the deficit, then there will be the serious issue. What happens when we have nothing left? The only thing that remains then is we'll have to start outsourcing. Outsourcing in relation to frontline policing can never be outsourced for the simple reason that you can never have volunteer police officers replaced by outsourcing. But there may be other things. We already look at forensics, we're looking at vehicles, we look at other issues that may possibly be a way forward. I know people may not want to hear this, but my question is very simple. After we have tried everything and with a further 20% cut, what are we going to do next? And remember, the 20% will be of the 70% of the budget that comes from central government, because 30% or 33% comes from local taxpayer. So we lose more than most forces nationally who have a 50-50 from the central budget and those that come in from local authority. So unfortunately, some tough decisions will have to be made, but I pledge certainly that the police officers and the staff that are working with the police, their jobs have to be maintained at all costs. It's as simple as that. The outsourcing would have to do the support work, paperwork, etc., to try and free more people away from offices if we can, into the front line, because the single biggest thing that asked by the general public is they wish to see visibility, they wish to see police officers on the street. They cannot be parachuted from anywhere, they have to come from somewhere. So we have to be practical about this, that we need to move some officers into frontline policing and start some of the work support from back to what I call staff.
Clive, to you, perhaps you might include in your answer, please, the issue of outsourcing, sometimes called privatisation. Not sure which is the better word, but perhaps you might comment, please.
Yeah, of course I will. Can I first of all deal with the end crime commissioning part of your question? When I started off the listening process when I was selected as a candidate, pretty much everything I heard was new, unsurprisingly. Then as the months go by, you stop hearing new things. Occasionally you do, but guess what? You hear some things again and again. And one of the messages that's come home most starkly to me, and you must recognise this, and Sylvan, of course, as members of the magistracy benches, that if we're ever going to get crime numbers to any significant level, we have to deal with reoffending. Sylvan has mentioned the stats, but just to confirm, 18 to 24-year-olds, 10% of the population, in excess of 30% of the crime. 67% of them who go to jail are back in jail again inside 2 years. And so it goes on. And the reasons for it are the ones that we all know. They're about drugs, they're about disruptive, difficult, whatever phrase you wish to use, families, and so on. And to me, this is one of the great opportunities of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And by the way, some of the funding will follow it as well, which is to deal with the broad spectrum of agencies and cross-agency work that will help young people, frankly, not waste their lives. I mean, let's not forget, it's not just a matter of as Suleiman implied, it's locking them up, as it were, and making society safe by keeping them off the streets. It's a matter as well of mending them, of getting them to live a useful life, which of course is less of a financial drain on society too. So if you ask me what my main effort is going to be, I'll tell you now, it's that. Yes, we'll drive down crime in the broadest guise, but I want to be a PCC who will join all those agencies beneath, not in horrendously large bureaucratic organisations, but in small, bespoke, and very evidentially based work, so that you know how much value for money we're getting out of the things we ask people to do, for example, with heroin cleansing and so on. You asked specifically about the question of outsourcing, and here I identify myself firmly with what Suleiman's just said. We may wish that we lived in a country where there was more money available in the public sector, but the reality is we don't. And I don't suppose the CSR that's coming up fairly soon is going to be particularly good news either. So the reality is that we'll have to live within a budget which is increasingly stringent, and that will require difficult choices. I've made some of those difficult choices in my previous job as Commander-in-Chief. Sadly, Her Majesty never ever gives you enough money to do the job that she wants you to do. So this is one of the issues of high command. You have to make those difficult decisions. And where sensible, and where the operational risk is fully mitigated, I'm not averse to outsourcing, and certainly I'm not averse to cross-border sharing. And Suleiman's mentioned some of them, and there are others as well. So I will go in and I will make sure that I do make the decisions to live within the reality of the budget, and I'll also make the decisions to maximise the number of uniformed police doing what they joined to do, which is get out on the streets, interact with the public, and help play their part in driving down crime. I'm not going to promise that I'll have more of them, or that there will be more of them on the streets. What I will promise is that I'll maximise the number that I can get there by various things, not least use of technology. So, for example, I think it's horrendous that a copper who arrests somebody at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night in the middle of Leicester City doesn't come back out on duty again until about 1 o'clock in the morning. That's a travesty. And so there must be ways of working around this. It may require changes of paperwork and or even minor legislation. We'll see, but I'd like to play my part in that.
Right. Sarah?
The anti-crime bit is what really attracts me to this role. I think there are some incredible opportunities by bringing organisations together across the public, private and voluntary sector to look at some of the really inherent issues around keeping our communities safer. Clive and Simon have both touched on reducing reoffending. They're absolutely vital. There's a whole range of other things that people hit on a day-to-day basis. Domestic violence, for instance. We've just looked at recommissioning our domestic violence services within the city, working with both businesses and with the voluntary sector, building on the best practice that exists across the country to try and make sure we keep people as safe as possible within a balanced budget that we can preserve going forward. The opportunities are there. It's about whether we've got the right skills to bring people together, to get them working together, and really to be able to show that that partnership delivers far more than we would do alone. Public funding is pretty much on a cliff edge. You know, I see that with the budget briefings we get, the council, and as part of the Strategic Partnership Board, every public sector organisation is facing significant funding cuts. There is a real temptation, when that's the case, for everybody to retreat back to their core business and just deliver what they statutorily have to. For instance, food safety and trading standards within the council. It's a statutory service, but it's a fairly small statutory service. We had to make 20% cuts to the budget last year within all our service areas. Rather than cutting that team, what we looked at doing is, okay, what do we provide as a statutory service? What do businesses need in the city? Well, we have an awful lot of new food businesses in our city and a very high turnover. So there's a lot of businesses that seek advice from us to say, okay, what do we need to do to make our business viable to help make sure that we pass the inspections? And we're willing to pay a relatively small amount towards that to make sure their business was successful rather than close down. So we built a business training unit, which is self-financing. Things like that are a different way of looking at things. It's about bringing everybody together to really look at what is needed and how can we do things differently and how can we make sure we add value to what we do rather than just doing it for the sake of doing it. So I think there are some fantastic opportunities out there, and actually the funding cuts make us think differently. They make us look at what else is out there, how better we can work together. One of my colleagues mentioned mental health. Under various section powers, people are able to be taken to a place of safety for themselves or for other individuals. In the figures for the past year, 3 times as many cases of people being taken to a place of safety have been done by the police than have been done by an individual from a health background. That can't be right. It's not the best use of our police resources. It's not the best support for the individual with mental health difficulties. We need to look at working those together far better so that we get the right response for the individual and we get our police out doing what they need to be doing, keeping our streets safer. So I think there are significant issues we can tackle. In terms of outsourcing, I'm very happy to answer this. It is a huge issue across the country. And Leicestershire signed the ODU notice as to whether we look to outsource things in the same way a number of other forces did. I've looked at the figures. I've looked at the figures for forces that have outsourced. I've looked at the figures for forces where they've joined up more effectively with other forces to share specialist services. And the figures for outsourcing don't stack up in the long term, in my view, because there isn't a variety. One of the key reasons is there isn't a variety of providers out there. There is one main provider, which means they end up with a monopoly of the service, and 4 years' time, when the contracts come up to be reissued, they essentially can hold the police budget to ransom. So I don't think that is a sensible use of public money, and I think it's something we need to be really, really careful of. The other thing is, we talk a lot about back office services and back office functions and frontline policing. I just want to remind people about what happened in the last 10 years with the NHS, where the cleaning service was outsourced. Because people thought, it's not a key part of the function. It's not our medical staff, it's not that important. Well, you took people out of the team, people out of that whole ethos of how the ward worked, how the whole service worked, and cleaning levels dropped, and we saw infection rates rise, and a significant damage to the overall work of the NHS and the overall budget of the NHS. So I think we have to be very, very careful when making these decisions, and I'd certainly look to sharing specialist services with other forces to find those savings, rather than potentially going into a monopoly contract with a private provider.
Okay, well thank you all very much for those answers. It's over to you now. Couple of mics. If when you ask your question you might just say, give your name and perhaps your particular interest. Max, when he was briefing me, had this wonderful idea that perhaps what I would do is collect 2 or 3 questions together and do them en bloc.